The Admiral's laughter died in his throat when the quiet woman at the end of the conference table spoke two words that shouldn't exist anymore. Specter One. That call sign belonged to a ghost, a legend who'd taken an impossible shot 3,540 meters across hostile territory before vanishing without a trace. The kind of shot that rewrote the record books and haunted training academies. Now she sat among them, her hands steady on the table, and suddenly everyone in that war room understood they'd been sitting next to death itself. Before we carry on, please hit the subscribe button to make my day, and let me know where you are watching from in the comments. The conference room on the third floor of the Naval Special Warfare Command headquarters in Coronado was exactly what you'd expect from a place where decisions about life and death were made with surgical precision. Gray walls, fluorescent lighting that hummed slightly in the background, and a mahogany table that had witnessed more classified briefings than most intelligence officers would see in their entire careers. The smell of strong coffee mingled with the faint scent of salt air that managed to seep through the building's climate control system, a constant reminder that the Pacific Ocean was just beyond these walls. Admiral Marcus Vaughn stood at the head of that table, his 6'2" frame casting a shadow across the scattered documents and satellite imagery that covered the polished surface. He was a man who commanded respect not through volume or intimidation, but through the kind of quiet authority that came from 3 decades of service in the teams. His hair had gone silver at the temples, and the lines around his eyes spoke of too many sleepless nights and too many brothers who hadn't come home. But his posture remained ramrod straight, and when he spoke, people listened. Today's briefing was supposed to be routine, at least by special operations standards. A new mission package was being assembled for operations in a region of the Middle East where intelligence suggested a high-value target had gone to ground. The kind of operation that required coordination between multiple units, air support, intelligence assets, and more moving parts than anyone wanted to count. Around the table sat the usual suspects, senior SEAL team leaders with combat ribbons that told stories their mouths never would, intelligence officers with clearances that went beyond top secret, logistics coordinators who could move mountains if given 48 hours and a satellite phone. And then there was her. Lieutenant Commander Adriana Cross sat 3 seats down from the Admiral's right, and if you weren't paying attention, you might not notice her at all. That was exactly how she preferred it. She was 34 years old, with dark brown hair pulled back in a regulation bun and hazel eyes that absorbed everything while revealing nothing. Her uniform was pressed to perfection, her ribbons arranged in precise rows, but there was something about the way she held herself that suggested a coiled tension just beneath the surface, like a spring compressed to its limit, waiting for the right moment to release. She'd been assigned to the command 6 months ago as part of the intelligence analysis team, and in that time, she'd made herself indispensable in the way that the best analysts did. She knew how to read terrain maps like some people read novels, could spot patterns in surveillance footage that others missed, and had an uncanny ability to predict enemy movement based on nothing more than scattered reports and instinct. But she rarely spoke up in these meetings unless directly addressed, content to let her written reports do the talking. The Admiral was wrapping up his overview of the mission parameters when Captain Derek Holloway, one of the SEAL team commanders, cracked a joke about call signs. Holloway was the kind of guy who could diffuse tension with a well-timed comment, and God knew they needed that sometimes. He'd earned his own call sign, Hammer, after breaching 47 doors in a single deployment without so much as bruising his shoulder. "I'm telling you," Holloway said, leaning back in his chair with a grin that showed too many white teeth. "The worst call sign I ever heard was Muffin. Kid got tagged with that after he accidentally set off a flashbang during a training exercise, and everyone said he'd popped like a blueberry muffin. Poor bastard couldn't shake it for 3 years." The room chuckled, the sound breaking some of the tension that had built up during the tactical discussion. Even the Admiral allowed himself a small smile. These moments of levity were necessary. Little pressure valves that kept people sane in an insane profession. "What about you, Cross?" The Admiral's question came out casual, almost offhand, as he gathered some of the papers in front of him. "I don't think I've ever heard your call sign. They give you one when you were in theater?" The question hung in the air for a moment. Several pairs of eyes turned toward the lieutenant commander, curious but not particularly invested. It was the kind of small talk that filled the spaces between serious business, the human element in a dehumanizing profession. Adriana's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Her fingers, which had been resting flat on the table, curled slightly into her palms. For just a second, something flickered across her face, an expression that might have been pain or might have been something darker, before her features smoothed back into professional neutrality. She started, then stopped. Her voice was quiet, carefully controlled. "I had one. A long time ago." "Come on," Holloway pressed, still grinning, completely oblivious to the shift in her body language. Can't leave us hanging. What was it? Something embarrassing? We've all got them. The Admiral had started to turn away, ready to move on to the next agenda item, when she spoke again. This time her voice was even softer, barely above a whisper, but in the relative quiet of the conference room, it carried perfectly. Specter One. The effect was instantaneous and profound. Captain Holloway's grin vanished like someone had flipped a switch. Major Patricia Keene, the intelligence liaison from Fort Bragg, actually dropped the pen she'd been holding, and it clattered against the table with a sound that seemed abnormally loud. Lieutenant Colonel James Park, who'd been reviewing something on his tablet, froze mid-swipe, his eyes snapping up to stare at Adriana with an expression that might have been shock or disbelief, or both. Admiral Vaughn, who had been in the process of turning toward the projection screen, stopped completely. His entire body went still in a way that spoke of years of training and discipline, the kind of stillness that predators adopt before they strike. Slowly, deliberately, he rotated back to face the table, and when his eyes locked onto Adriana's face, there was something in them that hadn't been there a moment ago. Recognition, calculation, and underneath it all, something that looked almost like respect. "Say that again," the Admiral said, and there was no humor in his voice now. It was the tone of a man who needed to be absolutely certain he'd heard what he thought he'd heard. Adriana met his gaze without flinching, though her knuckles had gone white where her hands pressed against the table's edge. "Specter One, sir. That was my call sign, 8 years ago." The silence in the room was absolute. It was the kind of silence that had weight to it, that pressed down on everyone present and demanded acknowledgement. Even the hum of the fluorescent lights seemed to fade into the background, as if the building itself was holding its breath. Holloway found his voice first, though it came out rough and uncertain. "That's not possible. Specter One is... she was..." He stumbled over the words, trying to reconcile what he'd just heard with what he knew to be true. The sniper who took that shot in Helmand Province, the record breaker. She disappeared after the exfil went sideways. There were rumors she was KIA, that the team just never recovered. "That's you?" "It's me," Adriana confirmed, and now there was something different in her voice. Not pride, exactly, but acknowledgement, like she was taking ownership of something she'd tried to bury for a very long time. Admiral Vaughn slowly sank back into his chair, his eyes never leaving her face. He laced his fingers together on the table in front of him, a gesture that somehow seemed almost meditative. 3,540 meters, he said quietly. Longest confirmed kill shot in the division's history. I was a captain when that report came across my desk. They taught that scenario at the advanced sniper course for years. Still do, as far as I know. "Yes, sir," Adriana said, and her voice was steadier now, as if speaking the name aloud had somehow released something inside her. 2,800 meters was the previous record. I extended it by 740 meters. Wind speed was inconsistent, elevation changes were significant, and the target was mobile. It took 3 hours of calculation and 2 tries before I got the green light from my spotter. Major Keene leaned forward, her earlier shock giving way to intense professional interest. She was a sniper herself, had done 3 tours before transitioning to intelligence work, and the technical aspects of what she was hearing clearly fascinated her. What were the conditions? "I've read the sanitized version of the report, but most of the details were classified above my clearance level." Adriana's eyes shifted to the Major, and for a moment, something that might have been gratitude flickered across her face. Someone was asking about the shot itself, the technical achievement, rather than what came after. High desert terrain in Helmand. Target elevation approximately 800 meters below my position. Crosswind averaging 12 knots but gusting to 20. Temperature was 43 degrees Celsius, which affects the air density calculations. I was using a modified Shaytac M200, intervention chambered in 408 Shaytac. Took me approximately 11 seconds from trigger pull to impact. "Jesus Christ," Lieutenant Colonel Park breathed, and there was genuine awe in his voice. 11 seconds of flight time. That's not a shot, that's a prayer. "It was math," Adriana corrected, though there was no arrogance in the statement. My spotter, Corporal Michael Briggs, ran the calculations while I controlled my breathing and heart rate. We'd been in position for 16 hours. The target was a Tier 1 HVT who'd been coordinating IED placements that had killed 17 coalition personnel in 3 weeks. Intel said he was moving locations and we had a 6-hour window. It was the shot or let him disappear into Pakistan. Admiral Vaughn's expression had shifted from shock to something more complex. He was studying Adriana like she was a puzzle he needed to solve, and the pieces weren't quite fitting together the way he expected. The after-action report said there were complications during exfiltration, that the spotter team came under fire and went dark for 72 hours. When the QRF finally reached the last known position, they found evidence of a firefight but no bodies, no gear, nothing. The team was listed as MIA, presumed KIA after 6 months. "That's correct, sir," Adriana said, and now some of the steadiness had left her voice. This was the hard part, the part that still woke her up at night even after 8 years. 30 minutes after I took the shot, our position was compromised. We think they triangulated the sound, or maybe they had spotters we didn't know about. We tried to make it to the primary exfil point but got pinned down in a valley approximately 3 clicks from our original hide. Briggs took a round through his left leg, shattered his femur. We holed up in a cave system and tried to call for extract, but our comms were damaged in the initial engagement. She paused, and everyone in the room waited. No one moved. No one even seemed to breathe. "We were in that cave for 2 days," she continued, and her voice had gone flat now, emotionless. The way people talk when they're describing something too painful to feel. Briggs was going in and out of consciousness. I'd stabilized the leg as best I could, but he was losing blood, and I knew he needed a hospital, not a cave in Afghanistan. On the 3rd day, I saw movement on the ridgeline above us. Taliban fighters, maybe 20 of them, doing a sweep of the area. They were going to find us. It was just a matter of time. "How did you get out?" Captain Holloway asked, and the earlier levity in his voice was completely gone. He was listening to a combat story now, the kind that got passed down in team rooms and remembered at memorial services. Adriana's eyes fixed on a point somewhere past the Admiral's shoulder, seeing something that wasn't in this room. "I didn't plan to. I planned to hold them off as long as I could and make sure Briggs didn't fall into enemy hands alive. But that night, there was a rainstorm, the kind that turns the whole desert into mud. The Taliban pulled back to wait it out. I made a decision." "You moved," Admiral Vaughn said, and it wasn't a question. He knew how these stories went, had lived enough of them himself. "I moved," Adriana confirmed, "put Briggs on my back and started walking. He was 6'1" and weighed about 190 pounds, and I'm 5'7" and was maybe 135 pounds at the time. I carried him for 8 miles through that storm. Couldn't use my rifle because both hands were keeping him secured. Couldn't use night vision because the rain made it useless. I just picked a direction I thought was east and walked. 8 miles, Major Keane repeated, and there was something like reverence in her voice. "With a wounded man on your back, in a rainstorm, through hostile territory." "I didn't have a choice," Adriana said simply. "He would have done the same for me, did do the same for me, more than once. He'd put his life on the line taking that shot with me. I wasn't going to let him die in a cave because of my decision to pull the trigger." Lieutenant Colonel Park was shaking his head slowly, processing what he was hearing. The reports never mentioned any of this. They said the team went dark and was presumed lost. There was a memorial service. I attended it myself. They put names on the wall. "I know," Adriana said, and now there was pain in her voice, raw and undisguised. "I was there, in the back. Nobody recognized me because I'd lost 40 pounds and they thought I was dead. Briggs survived, by the way. I got him to a village on the Pakistani border and they got us to an aid station. He spent 6 months recovering, has a titanium rod in his leg now, but he's alive. Married with 3 kids last I heard, teaching at the sniper school in Quantico." "But you disappeared," Admiral Vaughn said, and there was a question in the statement. Adriana nodded slowly. "After we got back, after the debriefs and the medals they gave us in a ceremony that was so classified even our families couldn't attend, I realized something. The people who tried to kill us knew who we were, or at least what we'd done. That shot made headlines in certain circles. There were bounties put out, not official ones, but the kind that get whispered in bazaars and passed along through networks we can't infiltrate. Briggs had a wife and a new baby at the time. I had no one, so I made a choice." "You went dark," Major Keane said, understanding dawning in her eyes. "I went dark," Adriana confirmed. "Changed my name, requested a transfer out of special operations and into intelligence analysis. Spent 2 years in Germany doing signals intelligence work where nobody cared who I used to be. Then another year in South Korea. Then stateside assignments where I could just be another analyst, another uniform in a building full of uniforms. I thought I could leave Specter One behind. Thought I could just be Lieutenant Commander Cross and forget about what I'd been." Admiral Vaughn leaned back in his chair, his fingers still laced together. The silence had taken on a different quality now, less shocked and more contemplative. "But you can't forget, can you? Skills like that don't just disappear. Training like that becomes part of who you are." "No, sir, you can't forget," Adriana agreed. "I still do the calculations in my head sometimes when I see long distances. Still catch myself reading wind patterns. Still wake up sometimes thinking I'm back in that cave with Briggs bleeding out next to me. But I thought I could at least pretend to be someone else. Someone normal. Captain Holloway had been quiet for the last few minutes, but now he spoke up, and there was something different in his voice. Not suspicion, exactly, but caution. Why tell us now? You've been here 6 months and never said anything. You could have just given us a fake call sign, something harmless, and we never would have known. Adriana's gaze swung to him, and for the first time since this conversation started, there was something that might have been a smile at the corners of her mouth. It wasn't a happy smile. Because I'm tired, Captain. Tired of pretending. Tired of being someone I'm not. And because... She paused, glancing at the mission documents spread across the table. Because I think this operation is going to need someone like Specter One, and Lieutenant Commander Cross isn't going to cut it. That statement landed like a bomb in the middle of the conference room. Admiral Vaughn's eyebrows rose slightly, the most dramatic expression he'd shown since this whole conversation began. What makes you say that? Adriana reached across the table and pulled one of the satellite images closer. It showed a compound in mountainous terrain, the kind of place where bad people went when they wanted to disappear from the world. This target, Abu Rashid al-Nashiri, the intelligence reports say he's holed up in this compound in northern Syria. We're planning to send in a direct action team, fast rope in, grab or kill and extract. Standard playbook. That's correct, the Admiral confirmed, watching her carefully. It won't work, Adriana said flatly. Look at the terrain. Look at the sight lines. This compound was chosen specifically because it's in a valley with limited approach vectors. Any helicopter insertion is going to be heard for miles. The moment your team hits the ground, al-Nashiri will either rabbit through one of these tunnel systems, she pointed to several spots on the map, or fort up in the main building and force a hostage situation. Either way, you lose him or you lose people, probably both. Lieutenant Colonel Park leaned forward to study the image more closely. The intelligence assessment didn't mention tunnel systems. Because they're not visible from satellite, Adriana explained, pulling out another image and laying it next to the first. But if you compare the geological surveys of this region with similar compounds we've raided in the past, you can see the indicators. Water drainage patterns that don't make sense, vehicle tracks that lead to the compound but seem to disappear. And here, she pointed to a barely visible shadow on the mountainside. Thermal imaging from 3 weeks ago shows heat signatures in a location where there shouldn't be any structure. They've got bolt holes, multiple ones, and they're ready to use them. Major Keene was nodding slowly, seeing what Adriana was seeing. So what's the alternative? We can't just let him sit there. He's responsible for at least 4 attacks in the last 2 months, and intelligence suggests he's planning something bigger. Adriana was quiet for a moment, her fingers tracing the contours of the topographical map. When she spoke again, her voice had changed. It was no longer the voice of Lieutenant Commander Cross, the analyst who sat quietly and wrote reports. It was the voice of someone who'd spent years in the worst places on Earth, making impossible decisions. There's a ridgeline here, she said, pointing to a spot approximately 4 kilometers from the compound. Elevation, approximately 900 meters above the target. Clear sight line to the main building, specifically to what looks like al-Nashiri's personal quarters based on the signal intelligence and the fact that it's the most fortified room in the structure. You put a sniper team there, wait until he shows himself, and you take the shot. Clean, no American boots in the valley, no risk to a direct action team, and he doesn't see it coming. 4 kilometers, Captain Holloway said slowly. That's 4,000 meters. You're talking about a shot that's over 400 meters longer than your record. 4,200 meters approximately, Adriana corrected. And yes, it's longer, but it's also feasible. The elevation change works in our favor this time, dropping shot which extends effective range. Weather patterns in that region this time of year are relatively stable, lower wind speeds than Helmand, and we'd have time to set up properly, to do the calculations right, to wait for the perfect conditions. Admiral Vaughn had been listening to all of this with an expression that was impossible to read. Now he spoke, and his voice carried the weight of command, the burden of making decisions that would determine whether people lived or died. You're proposing yourself for this shot. It wasn't a question, but Adriana answered anyway. Yes, sir. I'm the only person in this building, possibly the only person in the entire community, who successfully made a shot at this distance under combat conditions. I know what it takes. I know the calculations. I know how to wait. And I know what it feels like when everything comes together and you have that single moment where the wind is right and the target is still and your heartbeat falls between breaths. That's what this operation needs. You've been out of the field for 8 years, Lieutenant Colonel Park pointed out, though his tone wasn't dismissive. No offense intended, but that's a long time. Reflexes slow down, skills degrade, This isn't like riding a bike. You can't just pick up a rifle after that long and expect to perform at the same level. You're right, Adriana said, surprising him by agreeing. Skills do degrade, but I never stop training. Every base I've been assigned to, I've requested range time. I've kept my certifications current, I've stayed in shape, and more importantly, I've been studying. Every long-range engagement in the last 8 years, every new technique, every advancement in optics and ballistics, I've absorbed all of it. I'm not the same sniper I was 8 years ago. I'm better. The silence that followed that statement was different from the earlier silences. This one was charged with possibility, with the weight of a decision that was beginning to form in the Admiral's mind. You could see it in the way his eyes had gone distant, running through scenarios and calculations of his own. This would require approvals at the highest levels, he said finally. JSOC would need to sign off. The operational planners would have their say. And there's the matter of your current assignment. You're an intelligence officer now, not a special operations asset. I'm aware of all that, sir, Adriana replied. I'm also aware that if you send in a direct action team without considering this alternative, people are going to die. Maybe al-Nashiri gets away and kills more people later. Maybe your team walks into an ambush and we lose SEALs. Maybe it goes perfectly and everyone comes home. But maybe isn't good enough when there's a better option. Captain Holloway let out a long breath. She's got a point, Admiral. The direct action plan has always felt shaky to me. Too many variables, too many ways it could go sideways. A precision shot from distance eliminates most of those variables. It introduces others, Major Keene countered, though her tone suggested she was playing devil's advocate rather than actually disagreeing. What if she misses? What if conditions change? What if he doesn't show himself when we need him to? At least with the direct action team, we control the timeline. No, Adriana said firmly. With the direct action team, you think you control the timeline. But the moment those helicopters are in the air, al-Nashiri controls what happens next. He decides whether to run or fight or hide. With the precision shot, we wait until we have the perfect opportunity. We don't force anything. We don't expose anyone unnecessarily. We just wait. And when the moment comes, we take it. Admiral Vaughn stood up suddenly, and everyone in the room reflexively straightened in their chairs. He walked to the window that overlooked the Pacific, his hands clasped behind his back. For a long moment, he just stared out at the water, at the waves that rolled in, with the same patience that Adriana was advocating for. When he finally spoke, he didn't turn around. 8 years ago, a sniper with the call sign Specter One took a shot that everyone said was impossible. She made it look easy, or at least that's what the report said. What they didn't say was what happened after. What they didn't say was that she carried her wounded spotter 8 miles through enemy territory in a rainstorm to save his life. What they didn't say was that she gave up everything, her reputation, her identity, her place in the teams, to protect the people she'd served with. And what they definitely didn't say was that Specter One never really disappeared. She just went quiet for a while. He turned back to face the room, and there was decision in his eyes now. Lieutenant Commander Cross, you're officially reinstated to operational status, pending medical clearance and weapons qualification. You have 72 hours to prove you can still do what you say you can do. If you pass, I'll take your proposal up the chain. If you don't, you go back to being an analyst and we never speak of this again. Clear? Adriana stood, her posture rigid and military perfect. Crystal clear, sir. Thank you. Don't thank me yet, the Admiral said, and there might have been the ghost of a smile on his lips. If you miss that shot after I stick my neck out for you, they'll probably hang us both.
Dismissed. Everyone except Cross.
The others filed out of the conference room, though not without backward glances at Adriana. Captain Holloway paused at the door and gave her a nod that might have been respect, or might have been good luck, or might have been both. Then the door closed and it was just the Admiral and the woman who used to be Specter One. You understand what you're asking for, Admiral Vaughn said, and it wasn't a question. You're asking to step back into a world you walked away from. You're asking to be that person again, the one who makes life and death decisions from thousands of meters away. That's not something you can just turn on and off like a switch. I know, sir, Adriana replied quietly. I've been that person every day for the last 8 years. I just haven't admitted it until now. The Admiral studied her for a long moment. Why now? What changed? Adriana looked down at the mission document still spread across the table. I saw this target package 3 days ago. I've been running scenarios in my head ever since. Every approach, every variable, every possible outcome. And I kept coming back to the same conclusion. The only way this works without casualties is if someone takes the shot. And I'm the only someone who can. That's a heavy burden to carry, the Admiral observed. Yes, sir, it is, Adriana agreed. But I've been carrying the burden of staying quiet for 8 years. This one feels lighter. Admiral Vaughn nodded slowly, then reached out and gathered up the mission documents, squaring them into a neat pile. Qualification range opens at 0600 tomorrow. I'll have the Master Chief expect you. And Cross, don't make me regret this. I won't, sir, Adriana promised, and there was steel in her voice that hadn't been there at the start of this meeting. She left the conference room and walked through the corridors of the Naval Special Warfare Command headquarters, and it felt different somehow, like she was seeing it for the first time, or maybe like she was seeing it the way she used to before she became someone else. Sailors and officers passed her in the hallways, some nodding in recognition, others not even glancing her way. None of them knew who she really was. None of them knew what had just happened, but they would. The next morning came faster than Adriana expected, probably because she spent most of the night lying awake in her apartment, staring at the ceiling and wondering if she'd just made the biggest mistake of her life or the best decision. Her alarm went off at 04:30, but she was already awake, had been for hours. She dressed in her physical training uniform, made a pot of coffee that she barely touched, and arrived at the qualification range 45 minutes before she needed to be there. The facility was located on a restricted section of the base, accessible only to personnel with the right clearances and the right reasons to be there. It wasn't just a shooting range, it was a precision marksmanship complex with lanes that stretched out to distances most civilian shooters couldn't even imagine. The morning air was cool and carried the smell of gun oil and sea salt, a combination that brought back memories Adriana had tried very hard to bury. Master Chief Raymond Kowalski was waiting for her when she arrived. He was a man in his late 50s who'd spent more time behind a scope than most people spent at their jobs, and his weathered face showed every year of it. He'd trained snipers for 3 decades, had seen prodigies come and go, and his expression when he saw Adriana walking toward him was one of pure skepticism. "You're Cross," he said, not bothering with pleasantries. "The Admiral says you used to shoot, says you want to prove you still can." "That's correct, Master Chief," Adriana replied, meeting his gaze steadily. "Uh-huh?" Kowalski grunted, clearly unimpressed. "Lady, no offense, but I get desk jockeys out here every month who think they can still hang because they qualified once upon a time. Usually takes about 3 shots before they realize their eyes aren't as good as they used to be and their hands shake more than they remember. What makes you think you're different?" "I used to be Specter One," Adriana said simply. The Master Chief's entire demeanor changed in an instant. His eyes widened slightly, then narrowed as he studied her more carefully, looking for something he'd missed on first glance. "Bullshit," he said finally. "Specter One was killed in Afghanistan 8 years ago. I knew her, trained with her. You're not her." "I'm not dead," Adriana corrected. "Just been away for a while. And you didn't train with me, Master Chief. You trained me. Advanced Sniper Course, Class 17-12. You told me on the 3rd day that I'd never make it because I was too small to handle the recoil on the big rifles. I proved you wrong." Kowalski's face went through several expressions in rapid succession: confusion, recognition, disbelief, and finally something that might have been respect. "Holy hell," he breathed. "It is you. They said you were gone. We had a ceremony and everything." "I know," Adriana said. "I was there. Back row." The Master Chief shook his head slowly, like he was trying to reconcile the memory of the sniper he'd trained with the intelligence officer standing in front of him. "Admiral said you need to qualify at extended range. How extended are we talking?" 4,000 meters, Adriana replied. "Give or take." Kowalski let out a low whistle. "That's a hell of a distance. We don't even have a range that goes that far. Not on base, anyway. Best I can do is 2,000 meters here, and that's pushing it." 2,000 will work for today, Adriana said. "I just need to prove I can still hit what I'm aiming at. The longer distance shots, I'll need to work those out somewhere else." "All right, then," the Master Chief said, his professional demeanor reasserting itself. "Let's see what you've got. We'll start at 1,000 meters and work our way out. I've got a M2010 set up on lane 3. That'll work for qualification purposes." They walked together toward the range, and with each step, Adriana felt something shifting inside her. It was like a door she'd kept closed for years was starting to open, and she wasn't entirely sure what was going to come through it. The M2010 Enhanced Sniper Rifle was a beautiful piece of equipment, a precision instrument designed for exactly the kind of shooting she needed to do. It sat on the bench at lane 3, already configured with a Leopold scope and a Harris bipod. "Fundamentals first," Kowalski said, falling into instructor mode like he'd never left it. "Show me your prone position." Adriana lowered herself to the ground behind the rifle and her body remembered things her conscious mind had tried to forget. The exact angle of her legs, the pressure of the stock against her shoulder, the way her cheek welded to the rifle in a position that was almost intimate in its precision. Her left hand found the rear bag, making minute adjustments, while her right hand settled on the grip with a familiarity that surprised her. "Not bad," Kowalski admitted, watching her critically. "Muscle memory's still there. Now let's see if you can actually hit anything. Targets at 1,000 meters, standard combat silhouette. Winds coming from the west at about 8 knots. Call your shot." Adriana's eye found the scope, and the world narrowed down to that small circle of magnified reality. She could see the target downrange, a man-shaped piece of metal that represented someone who probably deserved what was coming to them. Her breathing slowed automatically, falling into a rhythm she'd learned so long ago it felt like a second language. In, out, and in that pause between breaths, when her lungs were empty and her heart was quiet, she found the stillness. She calculated the wind drift in her head, adjusted for the slight uphill angle, factored in the atmospheric conditions. The numbers came easily, almost effortlessly, like she'd been doing this math every day instead of just thinking about it. Her finger found the trigger, and the pressure was exactly what she remembered. 3.5 pounds of steady pull until the glass rod broke and the rifle spoke. The recoil was familiar, almost comforting, and she rode it back without losing her sight picture. Downrange, the target rang with the distinctive sound of metal on metal, and through the scope she could see the impact point. Center mass, maybe 2 inches left of perfect center. "First round hit at 1,000 meters, Kowalski said, and there was something in his voice now that hadn't been there before. Not bad for someone who hasn't shot in 8 years, though that was a touch left. "Wind gust," Adriana said, already making the correction in her head. "Called it at 8 knots, but it jumped to 10 right as I broke the shot." "You felt that?" Kowalski asked, impressed despite himself. Most shooters wouldn't catch that, especially not after being out of practice. "I never stopped feeling it," Adriana replied quietly, already settling back into position. "Ready for the next one." They worked through the morning like that, moving from 1,000 meters to 1,200, then 1,500, and finally to the maximum range the facility could offer at 2,000 meters. With each shot, Adriana felt more of herself coming back, or maybe it was more accurate to say that the person she'd been pretending to be was falling away. By the time they reached the 2,000-meter line, she'd stopped thinking about Lieutenant Commander Cross entirely. She was just Specter One again, and the rifle in her hands was an extension of her will. The 2,000-meter targets were barely visible, even through the high-powered scope, little more than dark shapes against the hillside backdrop. At this distance, the bullet would be in the air for nearly 3 seconds, time enough for a dozen things to go wrong. The wind could shift, the target could move, the rifle could have a microscopic flaw in its barrel that would send the round off course. But Adriana had learned long ago that you couldn't think about all the things that could go wrong. You just had to focus on doing everything right and trust that the universe would cooperate. She chambered around, settled into her position, and began the process of reading the environment. The wind flags at various intervals down the range told part of the story, but the real information came from watching how the heat shimmer moved across the ground, how the grass bent in the distance, how the air itself seemed to flow like invisible water. She built a mental map of the wind at various points along the bullet's path, calculated the cumulative effect, and made her adjustments. The shot felt perfect even before she took it. That was the thing about precision shooting at this level. Sometimes you just knew. Your body was in perfect alignment, the conditions were right, and there was a kind of certainty that settled over you like a blanket. She pressed the trigger, felt the rifle recoil, and watched through the scope as the bullet traced an arc through the morning air. 3 seconds later, the target rang with a hit that echoed across the range. Dead center. "Holy Mother of God," Master Chief Kowalski breathed, lowering his spotting scope. "That was a perfect shot. Not just good, perfect. I've been teaching this for 30 years, and I can count on one hand the number of people who can do what you just did." Adriana safed the rifle and sat up, her hands remarkably steady despite the adrenaline that should have been coursing through her system. "Does that meet the Admiral's qualification requirements?" "Meet them?" Kowalski laughed, a sound that held genuine admiration. "You just exceeded them by about a country mile. But you know that's not the real test, right? 2,000 meters is impressive, but you're talking about doubling that distance for the actual op. That's a whole different ballgame." "I know," Adriana acknowledged, getting to her feet and stretching muscles that had been locked in position for hours. "But I had to prove I could still do this before anyone would take the next step seriously. Now I need to find somewhere I can actually practice at the distances that matter." The Master Chief was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then his eyes lit up with an idea. "There's a place," he said slowly, "about 200 miles northeast of here, up in the mountains. Used to be an old artillery range, decommissioned back in the 90s. Some of the special operations units use it for extended range training when they need to work out problems that won't fit on a standard range. It's not official, not really on the books anymore, but I know the guy who maintains the access permits. I could make a call." "I'd appreciate that, Master Chief," Adriana said. "The sooner the better. I don't know what the timeline is on this operation, but I need to be ready when they give me the green light." Kowalski nodded and pulled out his phone, wandering a few steps away to make his call. Adriana took the opportunity to break down the rifle, going through the familiar motions of clearing the chamber, removing the magazine, and securing the weapon in its case. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, but her mind was elsewhere, already thinking about the shot she'd have to make. 4,200 meters. It wasn't just longer than anything she'd done before. It was longer than almost anything anyone had done before. There were maybe a handful of confirmed kills at that distance in the entire history of modern warfare. "You're in luck," Kowalski said, returning with his phone in hand. "My guy says the range is clear for the next week. Nobody else scheduled. He'll meet you there tomorrow morning at 0700. Get you set up. You'll need to bring your own rifle and ammunition, though. They don't keep anything on site." "That might be a problem," Adriana admitted. "I don't exactly have a precision rifle tucked away in my apartment, and the M2010 is great, but for the shot I need to make, I'm going to want something with a little more reach." "What did you use for the Hellman shot?" Kowalski asked. "The report said it was a Shaytac. Modified M200 intervention," Adriana confirmed. 408 Shaytac rounds. Beautiful rifle, perfect for extreme long-range work. But that was 8 years ago, and it wasn't mine. It was unit equipment. I have no idea where it ended up." The Master Chief grinned, and there was something almost mischievous in his expression. "Well now, that's interesting, because I happen to know that we've got an M200 in the arms room, brand new, just came in 3 months ago. We've been using it for instructor demonstrations and advanced training. I suppose if someone with the right clearances and the right operational need were to request it for a classified mission, that could probably be arranged." "Could it be arranged by tomorrow morning?" Adriana asked. "For Specter One." Kowalski's grin widened. "I'll have it ready by 1800 today, with enough ammunition to turn you into a world-class expert all over again." "And Cross?" "For what it's worth, I'm glad you're not dead. You were one of the best students I ever had. Still are, apparently." They shook hands, and there was an understanding between them that transcended words. The Master Chief headed off to make the arrangements, while Adriana made her way back toward the administrative buildings. He needed to brief the Admiral, needed to let him know that the first test had been passed and that the next phase was ready to begin. But more than that, she needed to call someone she hadn't spoken to in far too long. She found a quiet spot outside the headquarters building, away from the foot traffic and the listening ears that were always present in places like this. She pulled out her phone and scrolled through her contacts until she found the number she was looking for. Her thumb hovered over the call button for a long moment before she finally pressed it. The phone rang 3 times before a familiar voice answered. "This is Briggs." "Mike," Adriana said, and her voice was softer than it had been all morning. "It's me. It's Adriana." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When Michael Briggs finally spoke, his voice was tight with emotion. "Adi? Jesus Christ, is that really you? I haven't heard from you in, 4 years? 5? 4 years, 7 months, Adriana said. "I'm sorry. I know I should have called more. Should have stayed in touch. It was complicated." "Everything with you is complicated," Briggs said, but there was warmth in his voice now, not accusation. "But I'm not complaining. It's damn good to hear from you. How are you? Where are you?" "I'm at Coronado," Adriana replied. "And I need your help with something. Something big." She could hear the shift in his tone immediately, the former spotter recognizing the sound of an operational conversation. "What kind of big are we talking about? And please tell me you're not doing something stupid." "Define stupid," Adriana said, and despite everything she found herself smiling. "I'm about to take a shot at 4,000 meters, maybe a little more depending on the final target analysis. They want me to take out a high-value target in Syria, and I need someone who knows how to run the numbers like you do." There was another long pause. 4,000 meters, Briggs said slowly. "That's more than 400 meters longer than Helmand. Addy, that's not a shot. That's a mathematical improbability. So was Helmand until we made it," Adriana pointed out. "I'm not asking you to be there, Mike. I know you've got a family. I know you're teaching now, but I need your brain. I need someone who can help me work through the calculations. Someone who understands the physics and the variables at that distance. You're the only person I trust with this." She could hear him breathing on the other end of the line, could almost see him running his hand through his hair the way he always did when he was thinking through a difficult problem. "This is real," he said finally. "You're really doing this. After all these years of being quiet, you're putting Specter One back in play." "I am," Adriana confirmed. "And I'm terrified if I'm being honest. But this is the right call, Mike. I've looked at every other option, every other approach, and this is the one that gets the job done with the fewest casualties. But I can't do it without help. I can't do it without you, even if it's just over the phone." "Okay," Briggs said, and she could hear the decision solidifying in his voice. "Okay, I'm in. When do you need me?" "I'm going to a training range tomorrow. Place up in the mountains where I can actually practice at distance. I'll need your help with the ballistic calculations, with reading the terrain data, with everything. Can you clear your schedule for the next few days?" "For you?" Briggs laughed. "Adi, you carried me 8 miles through a rainstorm with a shattered leg. I think I can clear my schedule. Send me the coordinates of the range and the specs on whatever rifle you're using. I'll start running preliminary calculations tonight. And Adi, be careful. I know you're good, maybe the best, but 4,000 meters is no joke. There's no margin for error at that distance." "I know," Adriana said quietly. "That's why I called you. Talk soon, Mike." She ended the call and stood there for a moment, looking out at the Pacific Ocean in the distance. The water was gray-green under the morning sky, and waves rolled in with the kind of patience that took centuries to develop. She thought about the shot she was about to attempt, about all the things that could go wrong, about the weight of a life taken from thousands of meters away. But she also thought about the lives that would be saved if she succeeded, about the SEALs who wouldn't have to walk into an ambush, about the civilians who wouldn't die in whatever attack al-Nashiri was planning. The next morning found her on a winding mountain road 200 miles from Coronado, driving a nondescript SUV loaded with weapons cases and enough ammunition to supply a small war. The Riflemaster Chief Kowalski had provided was everything she remembered and more. The M200 intervention was a work of art disguised as a weapon, with a barrel so precisely manufactured that its tolerances were measured in microns. The 408 Shea tack rounds she'd been given were match grade, each one weighed and measured to ensure consistency, because at the distances she was shooting, even a tiny variation in bullet weight could mean the difference between a hit and a miss. The old artillery range was located in a valley between 2 mountain ridges, accessible only by a dirt road that wound through terrain, so rugged it made her wonder how they'd ever gotten artillery pieces up here in the first place. The man waiting for her when she arrived was exactly what she expected, a grizzled former soldier named Hector Ramirez who'd done his 20 years and then decided he preferred the mountains to civilization. He wore faded jeans and a flannel shirt, and his handshake was firm enough to crack walnuts. "You're cross," he said, looking her over with the kind of assessment that came from decades of evaluating people. "Kowalski said you needed distance. How much distance are we talking?" "As much as you can give me," Adriana replied, hauling her gear out of the SUV. "Ideally 4,000 meters, but I'll take whatever's available and work from there." Ramirez whistled low. 4,000? That's ambitious. The range technically goes out to 5,000 meters if you use the far ridge, but nobody's shot that far in years. Most people come here for 2,000, maybe 2,500. "You really think you can hit something at 4K? "Only one way to find out," Adriana said, already scanning the terrain with a professional eye. The valley was oriented roughly north to south, with the prevailing winds coming from the west. The elevation changes were significant, with the far ridge sitting approximately 900 meters higher than where she was standing. It wasn't quite the same as the shot she'd need to make in Syria, but it was close enough for training purposes. She spent the next hour setting up her position on a rocky outcrop that gave her a stable shooting platform and a clear line of sight down the valley. Ramirez helped her set up targets at various distances, starting at 2,000 meters and extending all the way out to 4,200 meters, where a steel plate the size of a car hood hung from a makeshift frame on the far ridge. Through her spotting scope, it looked impossibly small, barely visible even with maximum magnification. "That's your target?" Ramirez asked, following her gaze. "Good luck with that. The wind in this valley can be tricky. Swirls around the ridges in ways that'll mess with your calculations." "That's good," Adriana said, surprising him. "I need it to be hard. The real shot is going to be harder, so I might as well practice under difficult conditions." She pulled out her phone and called Briggs. He answered on the first ring, and she could hear the sound of typing in the background. "Adi, I've been waiting for your call. You at the range? I'm here, she confirmed. Sending you the coordinates and the atmospheric data now. Target is at 4,200 meters, elevation gain approximately 900 meters. Wind is variable but averaging around 10 knots from the west. I need you to run the numbers. On it, Briggs said, and she could hear the focus in his voice. The same focus he'd had 8 years ago when they'd been doing this for real with lives on the line. Give me 5 minutes to plug everything into the ballistic calculator. What's your rifle setup? M200 intervention, 408 Shay tack, 29-inch barrel, Leopold Mark 4 scope with M1 turrets. Ammunition is match grade, lot number 7732. Good gear, Briggs approved. That lot number is solid. We used it for testing at Quantico last month. Consistency was excellent. Okay, I'm getting preliminary numbers here. With the elevation gain and the wind speed you're reporting, you're looking at approximately 42 mils of elevation and 6.3 mils of windage to the right. But that's based on average wind speed. You're going to need to read the actual conditions right before you shoot and adjust accordingly. Adriana copied the numbers down in a small notebook, the same kind she'd carried in Afghanistan. Understood. I'm going to take a few shots at the closer targets first. Make sure the rifle is zeroed properly and I'm reading the wind correctly. Then I'll work my way out to the long-distance target. Take your time, Briggs advised. There's no rush. The shot will be there when you're ready for it. And Adi, remember what I always told you. The rifle doesn't miss. The bullet doesn't miss. Only the shooter misses. Trust your training and trust the math. She smiled, despite the nervous energy building in her chest. I remember, Mike. Thanks. I'll call you back after I've taken some shots and let you know how it went. The first shot at 2,000 meters was a warm-up, and it felt good. The rifle settled into her shoulder like it belonged there, and when she pressed the trigger, the recoil was smooth and controlled. The bullet impacted slightly left of center, and she made a minor correction to her windage. The second shot was dead center. She was dialed in. She moved to the 3,000-meter target next, and this was where things got interesting. At this distance, the wind became a much more significant factor, and she had to read not just the conditions at her position, but try to estimate what was happening at various points along the bullet's path. She watched the grass moving in the valley, watched the heat shimmer, watched the way dust devils formed and dissipated in the distance. She built a picture in her mind of how the air was moving, then translated that picture into numbers and adjustments. The shot took 4 seconds to reach the target, 4 seconds of holding her breath and hoping she'd calculated correctly. When the steel plate rang with the impact, she felt a surge of satisfaction that was almost physical. She was getting her edge back, remembering skills that had never really left, just gone dormant for a while. By mid-afternoon, she'd worked her way through all the intermediate distances and was ready for the big one. The 4,200-meter target sat on the far ridge, barely visible even through her scope. At this distance, she wasn't even sure she'd be able to see the bullet impact. Would have to rely on sound and on Ramirez, who was positioned with a spotting scope to help call hits and misses. She called Briggs again. I'm ready for the long one. What do your calculations say? Given current conditions, you're at 43.2 mils elevation and 6.8 mils right for wind, Briggs replied. But Adi, I'm looking at the weather data for that area, and it's showing the wind picking up over the next hour. You might want to wait it out. Let things stabilize. Can't wait in the real world, Adriana said. If conditions change, you adapt and take the shot anyway. I need to practice doing this under less than ideal circumstances. Your call, Briggs said. Just be careful. At that distance with variable winds, you could miss by 50 meters and never know what went wrong. She made the adjustments to her scope, checked her position one more time, and settled in behind the rifle. This was the moment that separated the good shooters from the great ones. The moment where you had to trust everything, your equipment, your calculations, your instincts, and yourself. She controlled her breathing, let her heart rate slow, and watched the wind flags in the valley below. The wind was gusting now, shifting between 8 and 14 knots, making it nearly impossible to get a consistent read. She waited, patient as the ocean, watching for a lull. Minutes passed, then more minutes. Ramirez shifted position beside her, starting to wonder if she was going to shoot at all. But Adriana had learned patience in the hardest school there was, lying in a hide for 16 hours waiting for a target to show himself, and she could wait as long as it took. Then the wind dropped, not completely, but enough. The flags stopped their violent flapping and hung at a consistent angle. The grass in the valley stopped thrashing and just swayed gently. She had maybe 10 seconds before conditions changed again, and in that window, She took her shot. The rifle bucked against her shoulder, and the sound of the shot echoed off the valley walls, bouncing back and forth until it became a chorus of reports. She kept her eye to the scope, tracking the bullet's path as best she could through the distortion of air and distance. 4.8 seconds later, she heard it, a faint ringing sound that carried across the valley, the distinctive tone of metal on metal. "Hit!" Ramirez called out, his voice showing genuine amazement. "Dead center hit at 4,200 meters. Lady, I've been running this range for 6 years and I've never seen anyone make that shot on the first try. Hell, I've never seen anyone make that shot at all." Adriana safed the rifle and sat up, and her hands were shaking now, not from fear but from the adrenaline dump that came with success. She'd done it. She'd proven to herself that the shot was possible, that she could still perform at the level required. But she'd also proven something else, that Specter One wasn't just a name from the past. It was who she was, who she'd always been, and who she was going to be again. She called Briggs back and told him about the hit, and she could hear the pride in his voice. "That's my girl," he said. "I knew you could do it. But listen, that was one shot under controlled conditions. You're going to need to do it again and again until it becomes automatic, until you can make that shot under pressure with lives on the line. How long do you have before the operation?" "I don't know," Adriana admitted. "The Admiral said he'd take the proposal up the chain, but that could take days or weeks depending on how many people need to sign off. I'm hoping they move fast, but you know how it is with anything involving JSOC. Use the time," Briggs advised. "Shoot that distance every day until you leave. Different times of day, different wind conditions, different positions. Make it so natural that you don't even have to think about it." And that's exactly what she did. For the next 5 days, Adriana lived at that range, arriving before dawn and staying until after dark. She shot in the morning when the air was cold and dense. She shot at midday when the heat shimmer made targets dance and waver. She shot in the evening when the winds picked up and made calculations nearly impossible. She shot in rain and in sun, and once in a brief hailstorm that left her soaked and miserable but still hitting the target more often than not. Ramirez stayed with her the whole time, spotting her shots and offering advice when she asked for it. On the third day, he brought his own rifle out and tried the 4,000-meter shot himself, just to see if he could do it. He missed by 70 meters, and after that, he stopped offering advice and just watched with the kind of respect usually reserved for people who could do things that seemed impossible. By the end of the 5th day, Adriana had fired 147 rounds at the 4,000-meter target and hit it 133 times. The misses were all explainable. Gusts of wind that came out of nowhere, a scope adjustment that she'd made incorrectly in the dark, one round that was damaged and tumbled in flight. But the hits were consistent, repeatable, and most importantly, they gave her confidence that when the moment came for real, she would be ready. On the 6th day, she returned to Coronado to find a message waiting for her. Admiral Vaughn wanted to see her immediately in his office. She cleaned up quickly, changed into her service uniform, and made her way to the headquarters building with a mixture of anticipation and dread. The proposal had either been approved or rejected, and she was about to find out which. The Admiral's office was on the 4th floor, with windows that looked out over the base and the ocean beyond. When she was ushered in by his aide, she found him standing at those windows with his hands clasped behind his back, the same position he'd been in the day she'd revealed who she really was. He didn't turn around immediately, just kept staring out of the water like it held answers to questions she couldn't hear. "At ease, Cross," he said finally, still not turning. "How was your training?" "Successful, sir," Adriana replied, standing at attention despite the order to relax. "I made the shot consistently at 4,200 meters under varying conditions. I'm confident I can execute the operation as proposed." "Good," Vaughn said, and now he did turn, and there was something unreadable in his expression. "Because JSOC approved your mission plan. You're going in, wheels up in 72 hours. You'll be part of a joint task force operation, but your role will be separate from the main assault element. While a team moves into position as a backup option, you'll be 3 miles away on a ridgeline making the shot we all pray works." Adriana felt her heart rate spike, felt the reality of what she'd committed to settling over her like a weight. This wasn't training anymore, wasn't practice rounds on a mountain range where the only consequence of missing was embarrassment. This was real, and when she pulled that trigger, someone would die or not die based entirely on her skill and preparation. "What's the timeline, sir?" she asked, keeping her voice level. "You'll fly out tomorrow night, arrive in theater the following morning. You'll have 24 hours to get eyes on the target, verify the shot is feasible, and get into position. Intelligence suggests al-Nashiri moves around the compound on a fairly predictable schedule. Usually appears on the second-floor balcony of the main building between 0900 and 1000 local time. That's your window. And if he doesn't show? Adriana asked. Then you wait. The Admiral said simply. You wait until he does, or until intelligence indicates he's about to leave the compound entirely, in which case the backup team will initiate the raid and you provide overwatch. But the preference, the strong preference from everyone up the chain, is for your shot to work. Clean, quiet, no collateral damage, no American casualties, no international incident when a helicopter gets shot down in Syrian airspace. Understood, sir, Adriana said. I'll need to coordinate with my spotter. I've been working with someone remotely, but I'll need boots on the ground with me for the actual operation. The Admiral shook his head. Already arranged. Master Chief Kowalski is going with you. He volunteered the moment he heard the operation was approved. Said something about wanting to see the greatest shot in naval special warfare history happen in real time. Adriana felt a wave of gratitude wash over her. Kowalski was good. Maybe not Briggs level, but good enough. And having someone she trusted calling wind and distance would make all the difference. Thank you, sir. That'll work well. There's something else, Vaughn said, and his tone shifted slightly. This operation is highly classified, even by our standards. The official record will show that al-Nashiri was killed in an airstrike, coordinates provided by overhead surveillance. Your name, Kowalski's name, none of it will ever appear in any report. Specter One will go back to being a ghost, just like before. You understand what that means? It means no credit, no recognition, no record that I was ever there, Adriana said. It means going back to being Lieutenant Commander Cross, analyst. After this is over, I understand, sir. I didn't do this for recognition. I did it because it was the right call. The Admiral nodded slowly, studying her face like he was trying to memorize it. You're a hell of an operator, Cross. In another life, another time, you'd be commanding a team, probably running your own task force. But you chose a different path, and I respect that. Just know that whether anyone else ever knows it or not, I'll know. The people in this command will know, and that shot, if you make it, will be remembered, even if the name attached to it has to stay secret. That's enough, sir, Adriana said quietly. That's more than enough. She spent the next day preparing for the deployment in the methodical way that special operations personnel learn early in their careers. Equipment checks, rechecks, and triple checks. The rifle was cleaned and inspected until every surface gleamed. Ammunition was examined round by round for any imperfection. Her kit was packed and repacked until she could find any item by touch in the dark. She called Briggs one more time, gave him the brief details she was allowed to share, and listened to his encouragement and advice. Remember what happened in Helmand, he told her. Remember that moment when everything came together and you just knew the shot was good before you even pulled the trigger. That feeling, that certainty, trust it. And Adi, come home, okay? The world needs Specter One, but I need my friend more. I'll come home, she promised, and she meant it. The flight out was on a C-17 loaded with equipment and personnel for various operations across the theater, and she spent most of it sleeping in a way that would have seemed impossible to anyone who hadn't learned to rest whenever and wherever the opportunity presented itself. Kowalski sat nearby, reviewing maps and meteorological data on a tablet, occasionally making notes in a waterproof notebook. They didn't talk much during the flight, both of them conserving their energy and focus for what was coming. They landed at a classified airbase somewhere in the region, and Adriana didn't ask where because it didn't matter. From there, they transferred to a helicopter that took them to a forward operating base even closer to the Syrian border, and from there to a staging area that was little more than a few tents and a lot of heavily armed people who asked no questions. The entire movement from Coronado to this place had taken less than 36 hours, and now they were as close to the target as they could get without actually crossing into hostile territory. The mission brief was conducted in a tent that was stifling hot despite the sun having set hours ago. Present were the SEAL team that would serve as the backup assault element, led by a lieutenant commander named Jake Morrison, whose reputation preceded him. He was professional, competent, and clearly not thrilled about his team being the backup option instead of the primary, but he kept his opinions to himself and focused on the mission. Our part is simple, Morrison explained, pointing to a map projected on a portable screen. We stage here, approximately 8 clicks from the target compound. If Specter One's shot is successful, we extract back to base and celebrate with beer that's too warm and food that's too cold. If the shot doesn't happen or doesn't work, we go loud, fast rope into the compound and either grab or kill al-Nashiri before he can escape through his tunnel systems. Questions? How long do we wait before you initiate? One of his team members asked. The window is 0900 to 1000 local time, Morrison said, If no shot by 1000, we assume conditions weren't right and we execute the raid. But Command has made it very clear that the preference is for the quiet option. So we wait, we hope, and we trust that Specter One knows what she's doing. Adriana spoke up from where she'd been standing in the back of the tent. I know what I'm doing, Commander, but I appreciate the vote of confidence. And for what it's worth, if I take the shot and miss, your job just got a lot harder because they'll know something's coming, so I won't miss. Morrison turned to look at her, really look at her for the first time, and she could see him evaluating, judging, trying to decide if she was arrogant or just confident. Whatever he saw must have satisfied him because he nodded once and said, "Fair enough, we'll be ready either way." They moved out at 0200 the next morning, using the darkness for cover. Adriana and Kowalski were dropped off at the base of the ridgeline they'd identified from satellite imagery, and from there it was a 3-hour climb to reach the position they'd selected. The terrain was brutal, all loose rock and steep inclines that made every step an exercise in balance and endurance. They moved slowly, carefully, leaving no trace of their passage and making no sound that would carry in the night air. By the time they reached the shooting position, the eastern horizon was just starting to lighten with the promise of dawn. The spot was everything Adriana had hoped for, a rocky outcrop that provided natural concealment, a stable platform for shooting, and an unobstructed view down into the valley, where al-Nashiri's compound sat approximately 4,300 meters away. Through her spotting scope in the pre-dawn light, she could just make out the building, a 2-story structure with the kind of reinforced walls that said the occupants expected trouble. Kowalski set up his spotting scope while Adriana unpacked the rifle and began the process of getting it ready. Every movement was deliberate, practiced, almost ritualistic. She'd done this so many times in training that her hands knew what to do without conscious thought, which was good because her mind was already focused on the shot to come, on the calculations and adjustments and the 1,000 things that could make the difference between success and failure. "Wind is calm," Kowalski reported quietly, reading the data from a portable weather station he'd set up. 5 knots from the west, northwest, steady. Temperature is 14 degrees Celsius and rising. Barometric pressure is 1,013 millibars. Conditions are about as good as we're going to get. "Range?" Adriana asked, settling into position behind the rifle. 4,320 meters. Elevation drop of 840 meters. "I'm getting an initial ballistic solution of 41.6 mils elevation and 5.2 mils windage right, but we should verify with a ranging shot if we get the opportunity." They settled into wait as the sun rose over the Syrian desert, painting the landscape in shades of gold and amber. Hours passed with agonizing slowness. Adriana controlled her breathing, staying relaxed but alert, her eye never straying far from the scope. Through it, she watched the compound come to life, saw guards changing shifts, saw vehicles moving in and out, saw the normal rhythm of a place that didn't know death was watching from nearly 3 miles away. At 0845, her radio crackled with Morrison's voice. "Specter One, be advised we have drone coverage overhead. Target has been positively identified inside the compound. Stand by." "Copy," Adriana replied quietly. The minutes crawled by. 0850, 0855, 0900. The window had opened, but still no target. Adriana felt sweat beading on her forehead despite the relatively cool morning air. This was the hardest part, the waiting, the not knowing. She could make the shot. She'd proven that 100 times over. But she couldn't make the shot if the target never appeared. 0912. "Movement," Kowalski said suddenly, his voice tight with focus. "Second floor balcony, east side. 2 individuals. Stand by for positive ID." Adriana shifted her scope to the balcony and felt her heart rate spike. 2 men had emerged, one clearly a bodyguard based on the way he scanned the surrounding terrain, the other wearing traditional robes and, she saw through the magnification, a distinctive red and white keffiyeh that matched the intelligence photos she'd memorized. "Target confirmed," Kowalski said. "Range 4,320 meters. Wind now 6 knots from the west. Steady. Elevation solution 41.8 mils. Windage 5.4 mils. Right." Adriana made the adjustments to her scope, her hands moving with mechanical precision. The target was standing at the railing of the balcony, looking out over his domain, completely unaware. She centered the crosshairs on his chest, accounting for the slight angle, the distance, the wind, the curvature of the earth itself. Her breathing slowed. Her heart rate dropped. The world narrowed down to that single point of focus. "Wind steady," Kowalski confirmed. "You have a shot." In that moment, time seemed to stretch and compress simultaneously. Adriana thought about the 8 years she'd spent hiding from who she really was. She thought about Briggs bleeding in that cave. She thought about all the people al-Nashiri had killed and all the people he would kill if she failed. She thought about the Admiral's faith in her, about Kowalski's trust, about Morrison and his team waiting in the valley below. And then she stopped thinking entirely. Her finger pressed the trigger with the same gentle, inevitable pressure she'd practiced 10,000 times. The rifle spoke, the sound rolling across the valley like distant thunder. The bullet left the barrel at over 3,000 feet per second, beginning its arc through the morning air. 4.9 seconds. That's how long it took. 4.9 seconds of watching through the scope, of tracking the bullet's invisible path, of holding her breath without even realizing it. 4.9 seconds that felt like forever, and no time at all. The target dropped. One moment he was standing at the railing, surveying his compound. The next moment he was gone, falling backward as the bullet found its mark with surgical precision. Through the scope, Adriana saw the bodyguard's confusion. Saw him reaching for his weapon while looking around frantically for a threat he couldn't possibly see or comprehend. By the time the sound of the shot reached the compound, nearly 5 seconds after impact, there was nothing left to do but react to a death that had already occurred. "Confirmed hit," Kowalski said, and there was awe in his voice. "Target down. Holy God, that was the most beautiful shot I've ever witnessed." Adriana safed the rifle and rolled away from the scope, her entire body trembling with the adrenaline dump. She keyed her radio. Specter One to ground element. Target neutralized. Mission complete. Morrison's response came back immediate and professional, though she could hear the relief underneath. "Copy. Specter One. Confirmed via drone. Target is not moving. Hell of a shot. We're extracting. See you back at base." The exfiltration was smooth and uneventful. 2 helicopters appearing from nowhere to pluck them off the ridgeline before anyone in the compound could organize a response. By the time the Syrian authorities even knew something had happened, Adriana and Kowalski were already in the air, already leaving that place behind. The flight back to the staging area was quiet. Kowalski tried to talk to her, tried to celebrate what they'd accomplished, but Adriana just stared out the helicopter window at the desert passing below. She'd done it. She'd made the shot, proven that Specter One was real, that the legend could live up to the myth. But she'd also taken a life from nearly 3 miles away, ended someone's existence with a squeeze of her finger, and that weight would stay with her regardless of how justified the action had been. When they landed, Admiral Vaughn was waiting on the tarmac. He'd flown out personally to meet them, and the look on his face was one of grim satisfaction. He waited until Adriana had climbed out of the helicopter and stood before him, then extended his hand. 4,320 meters, he said as she shook it. New record, new legend, and just like before, nobody will ever know it was you. The official report will say al-Nashiri was killed in an airstrike. Your name won't appear anywhere. You good with that? Adriana looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. I'm good with that, sir. Specter One doesn't need credit. Specter One just needs to do the job. That's what I thought you'd say, Vaughn replied. Get some rest. You've earned it. When you're ready, there's a flight back to Coronado, waiting. Your desk at headquarters probably has a stack of reports that need analysis. She smiled at that, a real smile this time. Back to being Lieutenant Commander Cross, analyst. Back to being invisible. You were never invisible, the Admiral said quietly. You were just patient. And patience, as you just demonstrated, is the most dangerous weapon in the arsenal. 3 weeks later, Adriana sat in the same conference room where this had all started, surrounded by the same people, reviewing the same kind of mission planning documents. Captain Holloway was making another joke about call signs, and everyone was laughing, and the world kept turning the way it always did. But now, when people looked at her, there was something different in their eyes. They didn't know the details. Nobody outside of a very small circle would ever know the details, but they knew she was more than she appeared to be. They knew that the quiet analyst who rarely spoke up had capabilities that went far beyond reading intelligence reports. Admiral Vaughn caught her eye from across the table and gave her the slightest nod. It was acknowledgement, respect, and gratitude, all wrapped into a gesture so small that anyone else would have missed it. But Adriana saw it, understood it, and nodded back. She was Specter One. She always had been, even during the years when she'd tried to be someone else. And now she didn't have to hide it anymore, at least not from the people in this room. They knew her secret, or at least part of it. They knew that when the impossible shot needed to be made, when the stakes were highest and failure wasn't an option, there was someone they could call. Someone who'd spent 8 years in the shadows, carrying a secret that weighed more than any rifle. Someone who'd proven that legends don't die. They just wait for the right moment to remind the world why they became legends in the first place. The meeting wrapped up, and people filed out of the conference room, heading back to their various duties and responsibilities. Adriana gathered her papers slowly, letting the crowd thin out. As she reached the door, Holloway stopped her with a hand on her shoulder. "Hey, Cross," he said, and there was genuine warmth in his voice now. "I just wanted to say, whatever you did out there, whatever really happened, thank you. Morrison told me his team didn't have to go into that compound, and that means some of my brothers came home without a scratch. So yeah, thank you." "Just doing my job, Captain," Adriana replied. "No," Holloway said firmly. "You did a hell of a lot more than your job, and we all know it." She left the headquarters building and walked out into the California sunshine, feeling lighter than she had in years. The weight of the secret was still there, would always be there, but it felt different now, less like a burden and more like a responsibility she'd chosen to carry. Her phone buzzed with a text from Briggs. "Heard through the grapevine something big happened. You okay?" She smiled and typed back, "I'm good. Better than good. Turns out you can't outrun who you are, but you can choose when and how to be that person. Coffee next time I'm in Quantico." "You're buying," he replied immediately. "And you're telling me everything, even the parts you're not supposed to tell me." "Some things never change," she typed back. That evening, Adriana returned to her apartment and found herself standing in front of the mirror, really looking at herself for the first time in a long while. She saw the same face she'd seen every morning for 8 years, but somehow it looked different now. The eyes were steadier, the jaw was set with more confidence. The woman looking back at her wasn't pretending to be someone else anymore. She was Lieutenant Commander Adriana Cross, intelligence analyst, when the situation called for it. She was a colleague, a professional, a member of a team that worked in the shadows to keep the world safe. But underneath it all, in the places that mattered most, she was Specter One, the sniper who'd made impossible shots and lived to tell about it, even if the telling had to be done in whispers and nods and the kind of respect that didn't need words. The phone on her desk rang, jarring her from her thoughts. She picked it up to hear Admiral Vaughn's voice on the other end. "Cross, I know you just got back, but we've got a situation developing. New target, different theater, same kind of problem that needs your particular set of skills. I'm not ordering you to take it, but I am asking, are you interested?" Adriana looked at her reflection one more time, at the woman who'd tried to hide for 8 years, and finally stopped pretending. She thought about the shot she'd made, about the lives she'd saved, about the purpose she'd rediscovered. She thought about all the reasons she'd gone dark in the first place and realized that those reasons didn't matter anymore. This was who she was. This was what she did. And denying it hadn't made her safer or happier. It had just made her incomplete. "I'm interested, sir," she said. "Send me the details." "Outstanding," Vaughn replied, and she could hear the smile in his voice. "Check your secure email in an hour. And Cross, welcome back. For real this time." She hung up the phone and returned to the mirror, and this time when she looked at her reflection, she didn't see someone trying to hide. She saw someone who'd finally stopped running from her own legend and started living up to it instead. The world needed people who could make impossible shots, who could operate in the shadows, who could do the things that others couldn't or wouldn't do. The world needed Specter One, and Specter One was ready.